Good afternoon, and welcome to A Taste of Farming, talking about forestry in Virginia. I'm Neil Clark, and I've been an extension forestry agent in Eastern Virginia since 2006, and I had done a stint as procurement forestry in between my undergraduate and graduate degrees. Today, I just want to present an overview of forestry as it may pertain to a beginning farming operation in Virginia. Since Virginia is 62% forest, most rural land parcels contain some amount of forest cover, which may require varying degrees of management, from simple maintenance to accomplishing business objectives. First step in determining what can be done is determining your starting point. What do you have? This can be analyzed in terms of acreage, site productivity and conditions, age and species composition of the current forest, legal constraints, access to markets, and your willingness to put in some do-it-yourself work looking at niche markets, referred to researchers as non-timber forest products, or NTFPs. Acreage is the amount of forest land that you have. It impacts its marketability and can also impact tax implications in some localities. The marketability generally impacts the types of management practices that you can practically implement. And for the tax implications, the State Land Evaluation Advisory Council advises localities on land use valuation. Some localities, predominantly those near urban and developed areas, may evaluate land on its use value, which will then lower the tax burden on those acres. For the purposes of forestry, it must be a minimum of 20 acres, and that should be at least 40% of normal stocking of marketable forest trees. This is an example of parcelization. As the population of Virginia continues to increase, in most areas, ownership parcels continue to be divided up into smaller and smaller properties. This is displayed graphically here, where you see the number of people who own less than 50 acres is close to 90%, while the number of owners of 50 acres or more is just over 10%. The cost of insurance, labor challenges, and market specifications have shifted many loggers to capital-intensive operations with large equipment that has a fairly large footprint and cost to move between tracks. So a certain volume or value of timber must be present just to cover these fixed costs before profits are realized. The soil and lay of the land combine to determine site productivity. From the alkaline soils and cooler temperatures of the mountains, to the red clays of Virginia's Piedmont, to the droughty, acidic sands of the coastal plain, each of these areas favor or discourage growth of different tree species. Some areas are too wet for certain species, and some are too steep for harvesting or do not have stable soils. Here we can visualize where different species of pines are present in Virginia. This data is from the U.S. Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis data plots. We can also see this for hardwoods as well. We can look at the data even more closely to match species with the best sites. Next, there is the age and species composition of your state, which is largely determined by the land use history of your property. Virginia is blessed by adequate rainfall, so in most cases any abandoned land will revert to forest by the fortune of wind and animal dispersed seeds, or from sprouts of trees previously cut. Sadly, previous harvest practices have left much of Virginia's hardwood forest in a high-graded state. High grading is a result of the cut the best, leave the rest practice. It is likened to growing a garden and continuing to harvest the most productive plants while leaving the poorer plants and weed species to automatically produce future crops. In that case, the garden will become less and less valuable over time. A crooked tree will never straighten. An undesirable species will never transform into a desirable one, and inferior genetics will occupy the space. In the western part of the state, eastern red cedar proliferates down every fence line due to bird dispersal, combined with difficult to maintain areas. Having some cedar is great for wildlife and limited aesthetics, long-term soil holding. However, it is not a quick growing tree and the market for the wood is limited. Similarly, sweet gum is the most prolific natural cedar in the coastal plain and likewise limited market value. Red maple likely fills this role in the mixed hardwoods of the Piedmont. Active management is typically needed to foster productive forests for future marketability. This photo shows open fields or abandoned pastures that will naturally seed, but not always with the desirable stocking levels or species mix that meets your goals. This is a mixed hardwood forest that has been managed and improved for future value. Most trees in Virginia grow in even age groups, begun by some sort of disturbance, be it a harvest, storm event, or fire. These trees compete for sunlight, with the tallest of the species occupying the dominant spaces in the canopy. Trees suddenly jump in value as they reach market specification sizes. Likewise, partial harvests release sunlight and other resources which cause remaining trees to grow more rapidly and in most cases in a healthier condition. This graph shows the volume of timber by species, which allows forest managers and businesses to assess change over time. This photo series demonstrates the method and how long it takes to restore a productive forest from a previously high-graded state to a productive forest in terms of value. This is what the Pennsylvania stand looked like in 1927 before harvest. It's hard to tell from the picture, but there's a lot of understory, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. There were not many deer in 1927, so quite a bit of natural regeneration existed here. The merchantable timber was cut, the large straight sound trees of desirable species. Often this is where folks stop, resulting in 100 years of wasted productivity and less desirable situation depending on goals. In this situation, a clear cut was performed as a silvicultural practice. Prior to conducting the clear cut, the shade that would be left by the remaining trees in the high-graded stand would favor shade-tolerant species, which often are not the most desirable. Clear cut here allows all emerging stems to compete rather than to be hampered by the picked over stems left during a high grade. Here's the stand 10 years later in the rapid growth stage. All of these tallest, most successful stems are from stump sprouts, as they are connected to a large established root system from the harvested trees. This begins the competition for sunlight stage, forming largely straight trunks and self-pruning lower limbs. There are lots of trees per acre. Management could begin at this stage, but it's still tricky to determine what the best trees are, and natural means of competition is sometimes the best manager of the site. Here you can track the trees A, B, and C over time. Here at age 20, considerably fewer trees per acre and the strongest have thrived. This is a good stage to do some timber stand improvement. Age 30, you can see diameter growth continuing to take place on the most dominant trees. This is nearing the state that a thinning could occur if markets were present. If not, continued timber stand improvement could take place. Here's the stand at age 45. In the past, this is when the high grading typically began. One thing that might be noticed is limited understory. Some of this is due to the exploding deer populations in Pennsylvania at the time. This is not necessarily a great thing. It gives an aesthetic, but is not beneficial to most wildlife. It's okay for crop tree growth, but that may need balance with wildlife concerns. Age 60, seeing primarily crop trees left. Of course, these crop tree species, such as oak, supply hard mass in the form of seeds, known as acorns, for wildlife. Here you can track the trees at age 62, and at age 71, we can see a well-stocked stand, which, judging from the down stems, may be beginning to lose more value to mortality than is actually growing. Timber stand improvement is a great technique that can be used when the dominant trees reach a height where excessive branchiness won't result. You can begin removing trees of undesirable species in poor form. Crop tree release can be done later, where specific trees of desirable species and form are left, and adjacent trees, which are competing for resources, primarily sunshine, are removed, thus focusing growth on trees chosen for future markets. Legal constraints are not overwhelming in Virginia, but do need consideration. The first would be to determine where property boundaries are located and road access to the timber for harvesting purposes. We encourage all landowners to mark and maintain known boundaries to avoid incidental trespass. There may also be consideration of buffers, which may be required for water quality laws or for certification purposes. Likewise, buffers may want to be left for visual reasons. Lastly, more and more properties in Virginia are having conservation easements placed on them. Some of these easements specify if and how management can occur on the property. This should be verified prior to taking management actions. Access to markets is a concern. Access to markets is having an increasing impact in today's economy. The numbers of markets have generally been declining. However, the volumes of the existing markets have generally been increasing. Transportation is a huge factor in cost, greatly impacting the price received by landowners. Generally, the hardwood markets are located in the western part of the state, and pine markets located in the eastern and the Piedmont due to where those species grow best and have naturally been distributed. It shows counties with the highest overall value in wood products. Generally, this is correlated to access to mills and the total acreage of merchantable timber in each county. Wood quality and the products it produces ranges vastly in volume demanded and in value. Here's a quick visual showing several product classes across the state due to available markets. Finally, many beginning farmers may want to explore which niche markets or non-timber forest products can be gleaned from the forest. The Virginia Association for Biological Farming may have information and contacts for many of those products, whether they be medicinal products, nut crops, mushrooms, moss and decorative materials, needles for mulch, syrup, specialty wood products such as burls or gun stocks, or simply firewood. So once you know where we are, we need to determine where we want to go and how to get there. We need to develop management goals, look at constraints, develop a plan, and then find assistance to get these management practices done. National surveys done for the past 50 years for private landowners have listed beauty, nature, and other amenity benefits as primary and investment in income as low on the list. Yet at some point, the financial reward does entice most landowners to conduct harvests. Sometimes harvests are performed for biological and health purposes in case of decadent forest or storm-damaged areas. Social constraints are usually not overwhelming in Virginia, but sometimes near highly populated areas or scenic valleys, aesthetic or neighbor issues may provide a pause. Economic constraints are real with the shrinking tract sizes, reduced numbers of markets, and high volume loggers. Also, certain site characteristics are limiting. Ginseng can't be grown effectively on just any acreage, soil type, or pH, and the stand condition also impacts the success of this crop. Likewise, growing oak in eastern forests can be done, but may not be the best choice on all acres. Wildlife habitat should also be a consideration for how much and when you harvest, especially if there are any rare species around your property. Harvesting impacts on the soil need to be considered as well. You also may have aesthetic considerations. The risk of damage from natural disaster is potentially a factor in making harvest decisions, as well as damage from devastating insects or pathogens. The red trees in this photograph are dead pine trees caused by an outbreak of the southern pine beetle. These dead oak trees were largely the result of gypsy moth attacks of already stressed trees. You may want to begin by setting management goals, consider your restraints, and then develop a plan to achieve those goals. And finally, seek assistance in helping to plan or to implement those practices. For assistance in formulating a plan or conducting or contracting management practices, the first place to begin would be the Virginia Department of Forestry. They have foresters who cover every county in Virginia and will give you great advice for next steps. They also can write management plans. Some of them require a fee, and they can connect you with other consulting foresters, some of which are involved in the Association of Consulting Foresters, who can assist you with conducting timber sales or doing contract management work. And lastly, the Virginia Department of Forestry is a connection and conduit to the NRCS, or Natural Resources Conservation Service. If you have a plan that aligns with conservation funding, such as water quality, soil stabilization, wildlife benefits, or diminished species restoration. And finally, the Virginia Forest Landowner Education Program, which is housed at Virginia Tech, conducts courses, workshops, tours, retreats, and offers publications and other educational opportunities to provide you information about your forest resources. Similar to this presentation, but more in depth on certain topics and more detailed according to client needs. If you Google VFLEP to get to the website, which is listed here, more resources are available there. Likewise, Virginia Forest Landowner Education Program has a YouTube channel where many videos can be found on various topics related to forest management. And remember, I'll be available next Friday, January 21st at noon for a live question and answer period. Hope to see you then.